Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Warriors Corner for the briefing on Army Wellness Center Musculoskeletal Injury Reduction Program. Today's speakers will be Brigadier General Jeff Johnson, Deputy Chief of Staff for Support, United States Army Medical Command, Chief of Dental Corps. Dr. Bruce Jones, Army Lead and Injury Surveillance at the Army Public Health Center. Mr. Todd Hoover, Army Wellness Center Operation Division Chief, Army Public Health Center. During the question and answer section, please wait until you have the mic to ask your question. At this time, let's welcome Brigadier General Jones.
Good afternoon. It's great to see those who have stuck it out till the end here at the Army Warriors Corner. I think everybody that's here at this time gets 10,000 meaningless points. So feel free to take those, and I think if you take them over to one of the stands here, they'll give you a meaningless gift as well. So it's my pleasure to have an opportunity to introduce really a couple of experts that are going to talk to you today about musculoskeletal or MSK prevention. That's what this is really all about. And the reason it's important is because the number one medical non-readiness factor in our formation is MSK injuries. And that's really why we need to figure out what makes it up and what do we need to do about it. So let me just start off by teasing you a little bit with a little bit of a story. The year before I came into the military, 1982, the FORSCOM commander asked a question of his staff that got a lot of this started. His question to his staff at that time was, hey, I noticed we're having a lot of injuries. What if I were to mandate that everybody had to wear running shoes instead of combat boots in order to do physical training? Because at that time, everybody was wearing combat boots. So an interventional study was set up in order to be able to test that hypothesis. Thousands of tennis shoes were purchased, and the study never happened. Because that same year, the Chief of Staff of the Army said, I don't really care to know what the science is behind this. What I want to do is I just want to tell everybody they got to wear tennis shoes, and that's going to decrease injury rates. So they did that. We didn't really get a chance to do the study then, but then the studies came over subsequent years, and we found out that it really doesn't matter from an injury perspective whether you're wearing combat boots or you're wearing tennis shoes. Found out that there wasn't really a magic answer that FORSCOM commander was looking for. So there's also been some additional studies over the course of time that looked at, well, if we have a better stretching program, that's obviously going to change injury rates, which it doesn't. Well, what if we have a particular manufacturer of a tennis shoe? Maybe that would change what the injury rate, no, didn't affect it at all. Also studied, well, maybe if we match the kind of shoe with the type of foot, high arch, low arch, flat feet, pes planus, whatever it might be, guess what? No magic bullets to this problem. And so that's been kind of interesting to watch over the course of time how it is that we've tried to get after injury prevention, but really haven't had the science behind it. Today, we're going to have an opportunity to hear some of the science behind it and to understand what it is that can be done in order to identify those who are in the formation that are at highest risk for injury prevention. One other quick story, just to demonstrate that you can have an impact on injury prevention. In 2003 to 2013, TRADOC directed Army Accessions Command to conduct a standardized, structured physical training program in their brigade combat training units. So they spent a lot of time decreasing the amount of total mileage that they did during basic training. They did interval training. They decreased the mileage. They did more multi-directional functional movements like grass drills or guerrilla drills. And they found that they were able to decrease the injury rate in those formations by 46%. So it went from nearly 4,000 to 2,000 injuries per trainee per year in those formations by changing the structure and the intensity at which individuals worked out. So over the course of time, and you're going to hear again today from the research from our experts, that we really know that there's two modifiable risk factors for getting after musculoskeletal injuries, MSK injuries. Those are the type and intensity at which you work out and the level of individual physical fitness for each person that is inside of that formation. Fortunately, we have the Army Wellness Centers at each one of our camps, posts, and stations across the United States who has advanced technology that can assess what a person's individual fitness level is and to target and give individualized exercise prescriptions in order to be able to help them get through those two modifiable risk factors. So really what we want to do today is to present options for commanders to understand how they can get after musculoskeletal injuries, how they can get upstream of the number one medical non-readiness action that's taking place. Impact of that, we currently have about 8 million limited duty days inside of our total Army every year from this. That has a significant impact on training and on the readiness. So without any further ado, let me introduce the true experts here who are going to walk you through some interesting information that I'm sure you're going to have some questions at the end for. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Bruce Jones. Dr. Jones is a physician, retired colonel as well, who has spent his entire military and civilian career researching and investigating injuries inside of our troops and our formations. Dr. Jones, great to have you here. Also have Dr. Hoover, who is here with us. He's an exercise physiologist who really was the brainchild behind the Army Wellness Centers. Initially envisioned them and then implemented them across the United States, across CONUS, initially starting in Europe. And so, Todd, it's great to have you here as well. So, gentlemen, take it over from here.
Thank you, sir. So is the mic on? I guess it is. So, General Johnson, thank you for that very excellent introduction to the topic. As General Johnson said, what we're going to talk to you about today is the biggest medical threat to readiness of the Army, and we'll also talk to you about how we can improve readiness through injury reduction. Next slide. So I'll try to answer 3 questions for you. The first one is, why should we be interested? How big is this problem? The next question is, what causes this problem? Why do we have the problem? And then Todd Hoover will talk to you about how we can get ahead of this problem through health promotion in the Army Wellness Centers. Next slide. So there's a wide variety of injuries that affect soldiers, as you can see here. These are mostly traumatic injuries. The number one health problem, as you will see, is actually overuse injuries from training-related activities. Next slide. So this slide gives you an idea of just how big the problem is. You can see the top line here. If you can't read it, it says injuries. And there are roughly, in 2017, 2 million, a little more than 2 million, injury encounters in medical treatment facilities. Second leading cause was mental health at just about 1 million, and then everything else was much lower. If you look at the second line, under the blue line, you can see the number of specific injuries. Those were roughly 350,000, affecting 250 to 300 soldiers that year. That's what we see year in and year out. So this is a big problem. Next slide. 97% of all the injuries that we see are they aren't necessarily musculoskeletal, but they're due to a transfer of energy from an external source. And 75% of all injuries are musculoskeletal injuries due to cumulative trauma, what in sports medicine we call overuse injuries from too much training. These injuries include things like stress fractures, Achilles tendonitis, patellofemoral pain syndrome, plantar fasciitis, and other back and knee pain syndromes. Next slide. Another way of looking at the magnitude of the problem is to look at days of limited duty due to injuries, or profile days. And what you can see across this yellow line here is musculoskeletal injuries. And just in the first half of 2019, there were 4.1 million profiles prescribed for soldiers. The second leading cause was actually pregnancy and postpartum recovery at about 725,000, 10.2% of the problem. And the third leading category of health was behavioral health at just over 700,000 and 10%. So musculoskeletal injuries accounted for almost 60% of all prescribed limited duty for the Army in the first half of this year. Next slide. So what are the main take-home lessons so far? Injuries are the #1 medical threat to readiness. Musculoskeletal injuries, due mostly to training and vigorous operational activities, are the biggest portion of that problem. And as you saw, over 4 million days in the first half of the year, which would average out, as General Johnson said, to about 8 million days of limited duty annually. Next slide. So why do we have this problem? I think for most of us who have been in the military, we know why. It's the type of activities that we have to do to be prepared for our missions. And this slide is a reminder that the type of activity is important. And as you will see in a moment, running is the leading cause of these types of injuries for the Army. But road marching, per hour of road marching, per mile of road marching, is twice as hazardous, actually 2 to 5 times as hazardous as running. And per hour on the obstacle course, it's 7 to 8 times more injurious than running. So the type of activity is important, and there are trade-offs. You can't trade running for marching miles and expect to reduce your injury rates. Next slide. So here we see the 5 leading causes of injuries for the Army. Running is #1 at 43% of the total, followed by MOS work-related tasks, equipment maintenance, and so forth. Falls, slips, and trips are third at about 10%, followed by road marching at about 8%, and then sports. So vigorous physical activities dominate the top 5. Next slide. So over 30 years of experience, actually it's almost 40 now, it sort of shocks me to think that that's the case, we have found that there are consistently strong relationships between aerobic fitness as measured either on a treadmill with the VO2 max or run times from unit records, and also between body composition and increased risks of musculoskeletal injuries. So what have we found over that time? Next slide. These are data on Army trainees, but we see the same pattern of association in operational units. And what we see here is along the horizontal axis, we see run times from the fastest quintile, or 20%, to the slowest quintile, or 20%, and injuries on the vertical axis. And the next few slides will be oriented in this same way. And what we see for male soldiers in blue, we see risk going up from about 10% to over 24%. So almost a 2.5-fold increase in injury risk as we go from the fastest to the slowest. And for women in the light red, we see risk going from 27% to 56%, a more than doubling of risk as we go from fastest to slowest. And this we have found consistently, as I said, in both basic training populations and in operational units. This is a study of 185,000 men and women, 143,000 men, 41,000 women. So everything you see on this chart is significant just because of the large numbers. Next slide. So what do we see when we look at body mass index, which we use as a surrogate for percent body fat? And it's really highly correlated with body fat in soldiers as well as civilians. Anyway, what we see here is as we go from low BMIs on the left to high BMIs on the right is that there's very little difference. But one notable thing is that the extremes, both the lowest and the highest end of BMI for women and for men, are at greater risk than those with average BMIs. Now, we know that as BMI or body fat goes up, run times get slower and aerobic fitness goes down. So we wondered what would happen if we looked at both fitness and body fat at the same time, or BMI at the same time. Next slide. So this is what we found. This is the incidence of injury by 2-mile run time and BMI for women. And just to orient you, along the horizontal axis, we see run times from fastest on the left to slowest on the right, and we see BMI from lowest, an indicator of low body fat, to the highest coming out from the back. And we see injury risk or incidence on the vertical axis. And this is kind of counterintuitive, but the highest risk was for women who had the lowest BMIs and ran the slowest. But interestingly, the lowest risks were for the 3 highest quintiles of women who also were in the fastest quintile of run time. So it appears that being somewhat overweight but physically fit is protective against musculoskeletal injuries. And also, you'll notice that the highest risk at every fitness level is for those with the lowest BMIs. Next slide. So this now is incidence of injury by 2-mile run and body mass index for men in basic combat training. Again, this is roughly 140,000 men. Same orientation, run times on the horizontal, BMI going from low to high, coming out of the page, and the vertical axis is incidence of injury, and we see the same thing for men. The highest risk is in those who are in the lowest fitness level but have the lowest BMIs, and the lowest risks are in these upper 3 quintiles of BMI who are also physically fit. Next slide. So key points to remember at this point: running is the leading cause of musculoskeletal injuries in the Army, and some modifiable risk factors are poor aerobic fitness and also body mass index that's outside of AR 600-9, our body composition standards, either underweight or overweight. And by the way, BMI comes directly from the height weight standards. And then the biggest risk factor are slow run times, which are a behaviorally modifiable risk factor. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Todd Hoover, my compatriot here, to tell you about a way that we can manage this problem. Todd?
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Hey, thank you, Dr. Brigadier General Johnson. So, as Dr. Jones, I think he did a good job with laying out kind of what these data are suggesting. So, next slide. And what I'll briefly talk about are the primary and secondary risk factors that these data have suggested. And that is this, is that we have a primary risk factor, which is aerobic capacity as measured in run time. So if we have males that have a run time greater than 15 minutes and females that have a run time greater than 18 minutes, that's the primary indicator that that person's at a higher risk for MSK injury. If we add somebody out of compliance with the AR 600-63, either too low or too high, that's the secondary indicator. But overall, if we were simplifying it to leaders, we would just say, look, if you have soldiers that meet these runtime criteria as your primary indicator, those are the soldiers that most likely you would want to do an intervention on and try to increase that aerobic capacity. If you can do that and improve their aerobic performance as measured in a 2-mile run, then we can actually decrease the MSK risk factor. Next slide. So the Army Wellness Centers were actually started in Germany in 2004. Wie geht's? Wer kommst du? Oh, Stuttgart. I was in Heidelberg. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, so we started in Germany, and actually in 2005 at the hospital in Heidelberg, and it was really a simple concept. What we wanted to do was actually turn how health promotion and health education was delivered at the time, which was really a secondary and tertiary model. What we wanted to do with the Army Wellness Centers is we wanted to focus on primary prevention. What we wanted to do was to look at people with specific risk factors before they had an issue. So in the case of MSK, before they were injured, we want to prevent it. Before somebody had hypertension, we'd want to prevent that. And as you know, there's certain lifestyle modifiable risk factors that we can do, such as modifying physical activity and diet, and we can change a broad spectrum of conditions that we see in primary care. Well, when it comes with MSK, we can actually modify performance a little bit and decrease those risk factors. So with the Army Wellness Centers, instead of doing the traditional health education, health promotion, what we wanted to do was do something a little bit more evidence-based. And how we approached it was, so instead of just like lecturing to people, holding classes and stuff like that, what we wanted to do was assess them where they were at. So for example, if somebody came in and we were looking at aerobic capacity, we would do a VO2 max test, which meant that we'd put them on a treadmill or a bike, put a mask on them, and we would measure their aerobic capacity. And then we could actually tell them specifically what intensity they would need to train at a specific heart rate to achieve their goal. And we could give them a very targeted exercise prescription. The other thing that we wanted to do is measure exactly body composition. But instead of just doing it with some, anthropometric measurement or something like that, we wanted to do something a little bit more scientifically sound. So we introduced the bod pod or air displacement. And then for calories, instead of just, calculating out, doing a manual calculation of caloric needs, we'd actually do indirect calorimetry, which meant that we would put somebody, lay them down, and actually measure the amount of oxygen that their cells uptake, and then from that we could determine how many calories they needed per day in 15 minutes by just measuring the amount of air that they consume, because for every liter of oxygen you consume, you burn 5 calories. And so this device is extremely accurate. We would see this in research and very heavy clinical settings, but we wanted to apply it to the general population. And then, of course, one of the things that the wellness centers have mastered is health coaching. And that is this, is if we're going to modify a behavior, we're going to need to coach people on how to do that. So the wellness center staff are highly trained in being able to modify health behaviors by coaching, by implementing these coaching strategies. And so we took these professionals, we trained them on coaching and the 6 core programs that we have in an Army Wellness Center, and made them very proficient at assessing people's health risk and then writing an exercise plan or health plan for them, and then coaching them what they needed to do. Next slide. So recently, we always stay abreast of new technology, and the K5 is something we've recently introduced into the wellness centers. And this is a pretty amazing device. I feel like a commercial right now with, selling like a cooking demo or something like that. But this is a K5. Mostly you would see this in a research setting, and this is a wearable metabolic analyzer. And what we do now with the soldiers, we're testing with a protocol, and we're working with Appalachian State University at Fort Campbell, and we're looking at MSK specifically. But we can actually take this device out to the unit where the soldier's at and have them do a 2-mile run wearing this device. And then from it, this would actually send a signal to a laptop that's at the edge of the track, and they can collect the data. And then from it, we can actually measure exactly what their aerobic capacity is, their performance, their substrate utilization, which means that we can tell them precisely what fuel they were using, carbohydrates, fats, when they were doing that activity, and then precisely tell them what they would need to do to modify their run performance to improve it. And the objective is to take this research-grade technology and bring it to the soldier and actually improve the outcome quite a bit. So this is one of the things that we've been doing in the wellness centers. And with Appalachian State, we're actually running some validation studies on a protocol using this device specifically for the soldiers in the 2-mile run time. And the objective is to leverage this technology at such a precise level that we can actually improve the performance of the soldier in in a few visits. And what we've shown in our data analysis is that the more frequently a soldier comes into an Army Wellness Center, the greater the impact or the greater the results that they have. Next slide. And this is a demo. I think you have to hit play. This is a little clip we have on the K5. And let me emphasize this. The reason that we wanted to go to this is to not be restricted to just the brick and mortar. Although the wellness centers are fully mobile at this point now, this increases our capability to actually go to the units where the soldiers are at and conduct these types of advanced testing. And so that was one of the innovations that we've been working on, is to improve it. Now, this was from a program evaluation that we had a couple years ago, and is actually published in the American Journal of Health Promotion in 2018. And what it showed were the effects in cardiorespiratory fitness. Soldiers that came in, almost 70% saw an improvement in cardiovascular fitness. We saw improvements in body composition, and we saw improvements in BMI. What was interesting in this is that those that had a specific target for improving body composition actually saw the greatest increase. Obviously, they were more motivated to do it. That journal article won Editor's Pick of the Year for 2018, and it actually looked at the effects of the Army Wellness Centers. So what we wanted to do was implement a program to standard, to, for example, like using the American College of Sports Medicine standards, to integrity. And we wanted to make sure that we delivered this to the soldier, to their family member, and to the people of the Army community to get these services that are highly specialized and capable. Next slide. And the other thing that we found in health behaviors, obviously, is smoking. Those that smoked had increased risk factor for MSK, and also sleeping. And these are areas that the Army Wellness Centers will address too with the client if they indicate that this is one of the issues that they're doing, or some of the health behaviors that they're engaging in. We can actually help them coach through that. Next slide. So the Army Wellness Center, key points. What we did show in our analysis is that those soldiers or people that did visit the Army Wellness Center saw improvements in cardiovascular fitness, and also saw decreases in body composition. What we're trying to educate leaders on is, if you have soldiers in your formation that meet these runtime criteria, those are the soldiers that would best benefit from a visit to an Army Wellness Center. And if you can get soldiers that have a runtime, males that have a runtime greater than 15 minutes, or females with a runtime greater than 18 minutes, those are the population that would most be suited to the type of services that we provide. Next slide. So we have a network of 35 Army Wellness Centers in Europe, across the continental United States, Japan, Korea, Hawaii. And the network of wellness centers are all linked in a central database, which means that if you go for a visit, let's say at Fort Bragg, and get an assessment, and 3 months later you're out at Fort Carson, you can actually follow up and do a whole series of assessments and get the same coaching, because your data is already there and it's web-based. And so all the wellness centers are linked through this virtual network. And the other thing about the wellness centers too is that we design the assessments to be mobile. So we can actually pull together teams from specific wellness centers to go anywhere in the world to actually do these assessments. Because as you can tell, most of our assessments are mobile. It's a mobile capability. Laura Mitvalsky and I actually went to Iraq, and we're doing metabolic tests in forward operating bases to assess soldiers in that environment. So the capability exists to provide these services anywhere in the world. Next slide. And I'll pause for questions. So Dr. Jones and I will be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Sir, I have a question. If you could go back, your soldier impact on fitness and weight loss. There were some bar graphs.
The bar graphs.
About 3 charts or so.
It'll be red, yellow, and green.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the reds? Though it's kind of surprising to me that somebody would enter into a measurement program, actually execute the program, and you'd have such a high percentage, in fact, getting worse. Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, basically what we're talking about is changing human behavior. And changing human behavior is very, very complex. And it takes a lot of effort to get somebody to modify and be compliant with a prescription. So when we looked at it, the effect sizes that we've seen with this type of program is that the effect size that we've seen in Army Wellness Center are at or greater than you would see for worksite type health promotion programs. So we've been able to validate that. The question then is too, with these data and this cohort of soldiers that were coming in, this is just the general population of everybody that came in. What we're doing now with the MSK pilot at Fort Campbell is these are very targeted interventions with people with specific risk factors. So we anticipate the outcomes to be much higher. So if you would look at it to explain the data why we would see that, it's just a general access at this point. But with very targeted interventions like the MSK at Fort Campbell, it's going to be a cohort of people that are specifically motivated because they're specific identifiable risk factors. So we anticipate those outcomes to be even higher. But our outcomes, like I said, are greater than or equal to what you'd see for these types of programs.
Well, it's also noticeable in this graph that there are 20 to 30% more soldiers who had positive outcomes than negative outcomes. So there's a net positivity here. Yeah.
Criticizing. All I'm saying is, sir, doctor, no argument there. I'm not surprised by the green. I would have thought the red would be smaller and the yellow would be bigger.
Yeah.
I would have thought you'd have more people that just they weren't able to modify and weren't able to take advantage.
Well, this is like smoking cessation. It's very hard to change the behaviors, but this is a pretty big success. Anyway, but it's a good question. I'm not faulting that either.
Hello, thank you very much.
Yes,
I've used the Army Wellness Center, and I think it's a fabulous, fantastic resource, and I use it in Europe, actually.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you, I wish I could run 2 miles in 15 minutes still. I'm not able to do that anymore, so I was just wondering if there is any correlation in between your study with musculoskeletal injuries and age.
I mean,
Yes.
I can answer, but I know he's the expert.
We see routinely that the older soldiers have higher risks of injuries, and it's for obvious reasons. Fitness goes down with age, and as a former distance runner, I can tell you that that's absolutely true. And weight also goes up, and those are both combined risk factors for injuries.
And it's for each decade after the age of 30, we see a decrease in our aerobic capacity just physiologically as we age as part of the aging process. But we can slow that down by being physically active and physically fit. So you may not be able to get that 15-minute time, but certainly for the age group, it could be relative to have a lower risk factor as we get older.
Thank you for doing this. Russ Reed with the Washington Examiner. I know there's been a lot of concern about the running injuries here, but with the new fitness test coming out this year, any concern that we're going to see more injuries related to some of the newer events, particularly when it comes to lifting weights and things that soldiers may not be as familiar with?
You know, we don't have an answer for that question yet. We suspect that with any new training regime, there may be more injuries from a different source. And that's something that we're looking at right now to discover. The bottom line is this new test is intended to actually test and encourage soldiers to work out to develop a wider variety of the components of physical fitness. The two that were primarily missing in the past were muscle strength and power, which this new test gets at. So the bottom line is we'll have to wait and see. But we're looking at it closely in conjunction with TRADOC.
That's a perfect segue to a question that I had, and that is, how is the research that you're doing being integrated with the Army Physical Fitness School and the Health and Holistic Fitness Program, or H2F?
You know, we work very closely with CIMT at TRADOC, the Center for Initial Military Training. So they're well aware of our research, and we're in constant communications with them. And they, of course, are the proponent who manages the Soldier Fitness School. So the doctrine is based very much on things that we've discovered in conjunction with them.
But I think you already answered my question because. Hello, hello. Okay. What I want to know is how it is related or synchronized with H2F or Thor-free. So is are Thor-free and H2F an outcome of your studies?
They have been aware of our studies and incorporated much of the thinking and principles that we've discovered. In regards to what the effects will be, we're in the process of discovering what the effects of H2F, health and holistic fitness, and the ACFT, the Army Combat Readiness Test.
And
so we're looking at that data right now. We've got our first feed.
And as these other programs evolve out, the wellness centers is an established network that exists today with evidence that there's an effect that shows positive outcomes. And so what will remain is something complementary to these types of programs, meaning that in units, if they have soldiers with these specific things that need an additional type of coaching or assessments, the Army Wellness Centers are a perfect platform for that to occur in, where the other ones will focus more on a larger segment of the population. The wellness centers will focus precisely on more precision type health promotion on people that need very specific health coaching, the assessments, and the type of work that would help improve their performance over time.
Captain Gorman with the Defense Health Board.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Hoover, with the wellness centers, what's their capability? Like, what are they designed for a certain percentage of a unit? I mean, obviously, if everybody went there.
That's a great question. And so we'll talk about briefly on that. So when we built the wellness centers, we looked at ASIP data, which is Army Stationing, Installation, Positioning. We actually looked at that at each community where we put an Army Wellness Center in. And what we projected out is that an Army Wellness Center would see roughly 25% of the population, of the beneficiary population, which is 40 miles of the MTF, within a 40-mile radius of the MTF. Now, to be more specific, what we wanted to do with the wellness centers is actually see the at-risk population, meaning, and that was a great question that you had, is the wellness centers weren't designed to see 100% of the population. It's not economically efficient to build a program that everybody would utilize. But if you can identify, and this is where the work with Dr. Jones has been very good, is when you surveyed a population, you've identified the problem, and you look at the risk factors, and you know exactly what these markers are. If you take those people and then you link them up with the types of services that we deliver in the Army Wellness Center, that's where the efficiency is in these types of programs. And that's what we'd want to do. So we're designed to see 25% of the beneficiary population, and the priority would always go to the at-risk or the primary risk factors within that population. Yes, ma'am.
On the K5 apparatus, is that available at all the Army Wellness Centers, and who's using it?
That's a great question. So we actually are testing 30 of them in several different, I think there's 22 wellness centers that have them. And the biggest one that we're working on, this is where we're doing a validation analysis. It's at Fort Campbell, and that's where we're actually taking with soldiers within a unit that have these MSK indicators, and we're actually referring them over to look at the effects on how we could use this device to improve performance to the unit. Yes. Yes, sir.
What are the implications for reducing soldier load and, during marches and rucks? What are the implications of that for reducing the rates of musculoskeletal injury?
That's a great question. I know Dr. Jones can answer, but I will briefly say that one of the things with the K5 is that we've got this new added capability where we feel that we're going to be able to predict what somebody's VO2 max is to determine what would be the appropriate load for them to carry using these types of devices.
So by assessing the residual aerobic capacity at a certain marching pace, you can determine what extra load a soldier could carry. So, I mean, this is another great capability. We can show right now that the more you march, the more you get injured. The heavier the load you carry, the more you'll get injured. And we now can show that the more pound miles you march. So if you multiply miles marched times pounds, you get pound miles. And so we can begin to discriminate between high and low pound mileage, and we can already say that those who carry or do more pound miles per month, roughly about 1,500 a month, which would be 3 10-mile road marches, I believe, with 50 pounds. I'd have to check the math in my head, but you get the idea. Those soldiers have more injuries than those who carry less or do fewer pound miles. So you can't just trade off running for marching and expect to reduce your injury rates on a minute per minute or hour per hour basis. So we have to balance these trade-offs, but we have a much better understanding of the general principles. And the main principle of training-related injuries, it doesn't matter what activity you're doing, whether it's running or marching or weightlifting now, we can show the more training you do, the more injuries you will get. We also know from a handful of studies that there are levels of training above which injury risks increase, but fitness does not. The key is to identify those thresholds at which injuries go up, but fitness doesn't. Those are two markers of overtraining.
And so as a special gift today for everybody attending, we got free posters and brochures if anybody wants to take. And everything that we talked about in the brief is nicely represented in these graphics. So
I think we're out of time. Am I right? Yeah, they're giving me a thumbs up, which is a thumbs down.
yeah. And don't forget your nice posters and brochures.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the briefings at the Warriors Corners. Have a wonderful Army Day to all.